Welcome back to Power and Politics. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, newly sworn in, I should say, is attempting to clarify comments she made about the unvaccinated. I'll briefly tell you about those comments and we'll play them for you in a second. She said they've been the most discriminated against group that I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. The statement she released today attempting to, she says, clarify that, says in part, I want to be clear that I did not intend to trivialize in any way the discrimination faced by minority communities and other persecuted groups, both here in Canada and around the world, or to create any false equivalencies to the terrible historical discrimination and persecution suffered by so many minority groups over the last decades and centuries. So here's that clip, that quote that I told you about that she said about the unvaccinated yesterday following her swearing in. Have a listen.
I don't think I've ever experienced a situation in my lifetime where a person was fired from their job or not allowed to watch their kids play hockey or not allowed to go visit a loved one in long-term care or hospital or not allowed to go get on a plane to either go across the country to see family or even travel across the border. So they have been the most discriminated against group that I've ever witnessed in my lifetime.
Here's opposition NDP MLA Shannon Phillips reacting to that.
It is unfortunate that already her only real legacy of leadership has been just behaving in a way that does not comport with the office of Premier.
The Power Panel is here to talk about this. Amanda Alvaro, Tim Powers, Kathleen Monk, Sherelle Evelyn, and joining us for this discussion, the CBC's Elise Von Shields. She's in Calgary. Elise, I'll start with you. One day in, and already lots of reaction to this. Tell us a bit more about what people are saying in Alberta today about this.
Honestly, not even a full day in. It was like 4 hours. Right. Like she was sworn in at 11 o'clock, and by 3 o'clock, these comments had come out. So in those 4 hours, I mean, she managed to launch a by-election to get into the legislature. She talked about firing the chief medical officer and replacing the board of Alberta Health Services, and then came with these comments about the unvaccinated being, in her opinion, the most discriminated group that she had seen in her 50-something years. And the reaction today has not been good, not just from the NDP, but from community leaders, from even BC Premier John Horgan, just basically saying that these comments are pretty out of touch with what we know of history. Like, even if you just look in Alberta, the last residential school here closed in the 1990s, so much less than 50 years ago. So she's really getting a lot of backlash for this, and of course, it being her first day in office, this was her first introduction to the general public. She has been speaking to UCP members pretty much exclusively for the last 4 months, and to some parts of the membership, a message like this wouldn't cause that reaction. But now this is her first kind of foray into the general public, and I think she's getting a taste of exactly what they think of comments like this and the ones we've heard her make about COVID during the leadership race.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Sherelle, that this is no longer just speaking to grassroots members who ended up voting for her, but really this was an hour-long news conference after she was sworn in, much of which was broadcast to many, if not most, Albertans. What did you think of the quote-unquote clarification she issued today? I want to be clear that I did not intend to trivialize in any way the discrimination faced by minority communities, and she went on to say some more things.
I don't know. I didn't think much of it. I mean, it's very interesting. That's a clarification. It's definitely not an apology. You know, she talked about, not wanting to trivialize, these groups that have been marginalized for, hundreds of years. And in the same kind of breath is also saying, but, we have to be, respectful and fight discrimination for all minority groups. And by, couching it that way, that she's kind of still talking about, people who chose to be unvaccinated and including them in that group and saying, well, we have to fight this. And then, the fact that she's now going on some sort of listening tour and saying, oh, we're going to set up meetings with people from various groups and have with my office and I want to hear about their individual concerns. And I mean, this is not her first kick at the can. She's been a politician, she's been a media personality. She has had a lot of time to listen. And the time for listening that should be something that you've done long before you decide you want the top job in the province. You can't say that you want to represent everybody when you have no clue and no empathy for the people within the province. I mean, this is the ideological set that typically kind of rails against the Laurentian elite, but it was such a kind of galling display of privilege to say that your life has been so unencumbered and so privileged for so many years, for all of your 51 years, that, you know, now that somebody has temporarily told you no, it is now the end of the world. So the fact that she's now going to, you know, drag everybody else in, you know, whether they're Indigenous, people of color, people of different faith groups, and to, you know, kind of in with her to say, okay, well, now I want to hear you. I mean, it seems a little too late.
And the thing is, Kathleen, there's a way to say, I disagreed with the mandates, and here's why. And people in this country can take that position, but to encapsulate or to characterize it in the way she did says something.
Yeah, and I think critically it reveals the kind of audience that she's been playing to, hearing from, and speaking to for the last number of years, not just in this race to the grassroots members who may have cared deeply about this issue, but to her private radio audience, right, and who she's been talking to and listening to there. Because as Sherelle points out, it shows, you know, just a massive ignorance not to kind of widen the aperture and understand that, you know, the kinds of discrimination that different groups and peoples have faced, not only in the province, but across the country, you know, especially during this period of COVID and the pandemic and all of the injustices that we have seen and witnessed, to just ignore that. It is embarrassing. It is the first day of office, and, you know, it would be unfair to say that a new politician or a new premier isn't allowed a few gaffes, but this gaffe, I think, deserves an apology. You've seen Rachel Notley call for that apology, and others calling her first few days, you know, almost chaotic. But I think it's going to take more than just the listening tour. And so if I was asked to give advice to Premier Smith, I would say, go dark. Spend the next couple of weeks reading your briefing books, possibly, you know, work in your election in Brooks, and read and learn. And then when the legislature reopens, I think it was scheduled for the 31st, but it might take longer than that. Elise would know better than I would. You know, get back in there and know because this is the big leagues. This is not private radio anymore. Yeah. This is the big leagues. And to be taken seriously, you need to be briefed well, and you can't be making embarrassing gaffes like this. You know, on construction sites, they have those 0 days without an accident. You know, like, I wonder if that 0 days without a political gaffe is going to continue into 2023 unless she takes the time to really think about, and her advisors give her the support that she needs.
And the apology, Amanda, is probably also something like, as Kathleen points out, the opposition is calling for. I would imagine the calls for that specifically will grow. Like, she does identify, you know, correctly, I think, in the statement, things that she did, like making false equivalencies, for example, or things she may have overlooked. But minus the apology, like the effect of that is kind of muted.
An apology will not come. There is no way beyond the clarification that was issued today that she is going to issue a full-fledged apology. And the reason for that is because it's really easy for us to say, well, this is a person who was making the transition from campaigning to day one of governing. So she was still using language that would be consistent with her campaigning, language that really pandered to a very narrow swath of Alberta, of members. Remember, 82% of Albertans are vaccinated, actually. So she was talking to a very narrow group. And it's easy for us to say that. But this was a true colors moment. This was a person who, beyond the veil of a clarification, really actually genuinely feels this way, that they are indeed the most discriminated people that she has ever witnessed in her lifetime. Those are not words that leave any room for clarification. I mean, that's clear. That's how she feels. So I don't think that an apology is coming, and obviously it's never a good day when you have to issue a clarification on day one in the job, but I think it's the tip of the iceberg. I think we're going to see many, many moments like this from Danielle Smith, and I think that she's, in the case of her career, digging her own grave when it comes to actually appealing to a broader swath of the electorate in a general election.
I think Amanda makes a good point, Tim, in that I used to cover Danielle Smith when she was leader of the Wild Rose Party. Again, I'll reiterate, I don't don't think we should, stop people from talking about their disagreements where mandates are concerned. But she doesn't. Amanda's right. She usually doesn't say things she doesn't mean, actually. So that is something to take into account, I guess, here.
Yeah, so two things here that I just want to expand upon. One, she either is still in shock jock mode and thinks she is on private radio and is trying to cultivate an audience. That's great if you're in private radio and trying to cultivate an audience, but that's not going to win you the job if you're premier. The other thing is, and you and Elise could speak to this better given your knowledge of Alberta, is this deliberate in terms of it being deliberately focused on mobilizing some grassroots support of the kind that she has cultivated in advance of that caucus meeting she's having in a couple of weeks? Because that caucus meeting, as we're led to understand here, is going to be very important for her because a lot of the people in caucus weren't her supporters. She won outside caucus. So she may be looking for a reaction here from average Albertans and more particularly party members to say, hey, yeah, no, Danielle shouldn't respond to this. We agree with her. Now, that's terrible, but that may be the politics she's playing here in advance of that meeting. And that maybe says more about her character. And I'm sure Rachel Notley and others in Alberta will look to unpack that if that is the case.
Elise, I'll give you the last word. What's your assessment of that?
Whether it was intentional or not, she's now got her barometer, right, for what the general Alberta public will and will not tolerate in terms of her rhetoric and in terms of her policies. So, she's got that measuring stick now, and it will be going forward a measuring stick that she'll have to define on other issues with the general public, because we've got 7 months basically until a provincial election, and she has been firm that she's not going to pivot. But all we've seen this week, basically since she won the leadership, clarifications on this, clarifications and adjustments on the Sovereignty Act. So those adjustments are going to probably continue as she kind of settles into this role, and we won't see her in the legislature until the end of November at the earliest. So I kind of am wondering what the 4 weeks before Christmas are going to look like here in Alberta.
I have a feeling we'll see a lot of you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our power panel tonight, Elise Von Schiel, Amanda Alvaro, Kathleen Monk, Sherelle Evelyn, and Tim Powers.